The courtroom buzzed, a low, anxious hum that seemed to vibrate in the polished wood of the pews and the imposing judge's bench. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of old paper, floor wax, and the unspoken weight of lives hanging in the balance. At the defendant's table, 28-year-old Marcus Thorne stood alone. His suit, a charcoal gray he'd bought for his first and only corporate job interview, was clean and sharply pressed, but the cuffs were just beginning to fry a small, silent testament to a battle hard-fought long before he ever set foot in this room. Across from him, Caleb Vance, the top attorney for Lone Star Heritage Bank, leaned back in his plush leather chair. He was the picture of corporate arrogance, from his perfectly coiffed silver hair to the glint of his $1,000 watch. He wasn't just confident. He was bored, as if this whole proceeding was a minor inconvenience before his afternoon tea time. From the elevated bench, Judge Alistair Cromwell, a man whose family name was etched onto buildings and park benches all over Houston, surveyed the scene with an air of amused detachment. He adjusted his glasses, a slow, deliberate motion, and a small, condescending chuckle escaped his lips, cutting through the tense silence. He tapped his gavel, not with a sharp crack of authority, but with a light, dismissive flick of the wrist. "Representing yourself, Mr. Thorne?" he drawled, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "Well, this should be entertaining." The gallery, a mix of board court staff and a handful of law students, murmured in response. A wave of condescension, palpable and suffocating, washed over Marcus. They saw a kid in an ill-fitting suit playing lawyer. They saw a foregone conclusion, but Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't look at the sneering face of Caleb Vance or the dismissive crowd. He locked his gaze directly onto the judge, his posture unwavering, his voice calm, clear, and imbued with a strength that seemed to surprise even himself. "I'm not here to entertain your honor," he said, his words slicing through the noise. "I'm here for justice. How did it come to this? How did a 28-year-old software engineer end up facing down a corporate giant and a hostile judge with nothing but his own conviction? To understand the steel in his voice, to grasp the fire in his eyes, we have to go back 6 months. Back to a hot, humid Houston afternoon, to the day his world was not just shaken, but set ablaze. 6 months earlier, the Texas sun beat down on the quiet, tree-lined streets of Houston's historic 3rd Ward. Marcus Thorne stood on the cracked concrete porch of his mother's house, the heat radiating up through the soles of his worn sneakers. This small, modest bungalow, with its peeling white paint and slightly crooked porch swing, was more than just wood and nails. It was the only home he'd ever known. It was the last tangible piece of his mother, Maria, a woman who had worked double shifts as a registered nurse at Ben Taub Hospital for 30 years. He could still hear her laughter echoing from the kitchen, still smell the phantom scent of her famous brisket simmering on the stove. She had died 2 years prior, peaceful in her sleep, believing this house her fortress. Her legacy was finally and forever hers, free and clear. But the paper clutched in his hand, a single sheet that felt heavier than a tombstone, told a different, horrifying story. It was an eviction notice, cold and impersonal. 2 words were stamped across the top in a bold, blood-red ink that seemed to scream at him. Final notice. And below that, the sentence that stopped his heart. Property TO be vacated in 14 days. His throat tightened, a knot of pure, cold panic. How? It was impossible. He had the deed. He had the final mortgage satisfaction letter from a decade ago, framed in his mother's bedroom like a trophy. He rushed inside, the familiar comfort of the house now feeling alien and threatening. He tore through the old metal file cabinet in the corner of the living room, his hands shaking as he pushed past files of old report cards and birthday cards. Mortgage statements, tax receipts, the original deed, everything was there. A perfect record of his mother's meticulous responsibility. And then he saw it, a folder he'd never noticed before, tucked away at the very back. Inside was a document labeled Second Mortgage Agreement, dated just 2 years ago. It bore what was supposed to be his mother's signature. But it was wrong, all wrong. His mother's signature was a proud, flowing script. This was a shaky, hesitant scrawl, the slant of the letters desperate and unfamiliar, as if written by a stranger's hand. A stranger who was trying, and failing, to steal his mother's identity. And in that moment, standing in the silent house filled with his mother's ghost, Marcus Thorne knew he was no longer just grieving a loss. He was facing a robbery. Like what you see. Well, hit that thumbs up, leave a howdy in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Easy as pecan pie. The discovery of the forged document wasn't a relief. It was the beginning of a nightmare. It was the first step into a labyrinth of corporate indifference and systemic bias, a world designed to chew up and spit out men like him. His first call was to the faceless entity that had shattered his peace. Lone Star Heritage Bank. He navigated an automated phone tree from hell, a disembodied voice cheerfully guiding him through a maze of options before placing him on hold. For 45 agonizing minutes, he listened to a tinny, looping orchestral piece, his knee bouncing with a frantic energy, the forged document lying on the kitchen table in front of him like a venomous snake. Finally, a human voice, clipped and utterly devoid of interest, answered. Foreclosure department. Marcus took a breath, trying to keep his voice steady. Yes, I'm calling about an eviction notice for the property of Maria Thorne. I believe there's been a profound mistake. Her original mortgage was paid off years ago. He could almost hear the eye roll through the phone, a sigh heavy with practiced weariness. Sir, our records indicate the account is in default due to non-payment on a second mortgage. This loan was taken out 2 years ago. The foreclosure proceedings are final. That's impossible, Marcus repeated, his voice rising despite his efforts. My mother never, ever would have taken out a second mortgage. She was terrified of debt. Well, Mr. Thorne, the voice replied, the feigned politeness more insulting than open hostility. I'm looking at her signed agreement right here. It's all been notarized and is legally binding. Perhaps you weren't fully aware of her financial situation. The insinuation hung in the air, a toxic cloud. They weren't just saying he was wrong. They were posthumously attacking his mother's character, painting her as irresponsible, secretive, a failure. The woman who sacrificed everything so he wouldn't have to. The rage that filled him was hot and blinding. I want copies, he gritted out, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. Every single piece of paper related to this supposed loan. Now, you can file a formal request with our legal department, sir, the voice said coolly, already dismissing him. But I can assure you, it will not stop the eviction. The line went dead with a sharp click, leaving Marcus in a silence that was louder than any shout. Determined to confront a face, not just a voice, Marcus drove straight to the nearest Lone Star Heritage Bank branch. A sleek, glass and steel monolith downtown that felt as welcoming as a fortress. There, he met Ron Fletcher, the branch manager. Fletcher was a man in his 50s, with a golfer's tan and a smug, self-satisfied smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He gestured for Marcus to sit in a chair that was clearly less comfortable than his own, and listened with feigned patience as Marcus laid out his case, spreading the documents across the polished mahogany desk. Fletcher barely glanced at them. Look, Fletcher said, leaning back and steepling his fingers. I understand this is difficult, but the fact is, the paperwork is in order. He slid the documents back across the desk, a dismissive flick of his wrist. People like you, he began, and the way he said a slight pause, the subtle emphasis made Marcus's skin crawl, need to understand how the system works. It's not made to accommodate personal stories. If the account is in default, you lose the house. It's just business. End of story. Marcus leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk, refusing to be dismissed. This signature, he said, his voice a low growl, is a forgery. It is not my mother's signature. Just look at it closely. Compare it to the original deed. Fletcher's smirk never wavered. He gave the signature a cursory glance. Signatures change over time. People get older, they get sick. They get desperate. They make bad decisions and don't tell their kids. It happens all the time. She did not take out this loan, Marcus insisted, his voice hardening into a blade. "And I think you know it." For the first time, Fletcher's expression tightened. The smug mask slipped, revealing a flash of raw, ugly contempt. "If you want to fight it, son, you go right ahead and hire a lawyer. But you better act fast. You've got 2 weeks. Good luck finding someone to take your case on such short notice." He stood up, the signal that the conversation was over. "Now, if you'll excuse me." The condescending sun hung in the air as Marcus walked out, the sterile, cold air of the bank feeling like it was choking him. Fletcher was right about one thing. Finding a lawyer was a brutal, soul-crushing dead end. The larger firms didn't even grant him a meeting. A clear conflict of interest. Their paralegals would chirp, a polite code for, "We do business with the bank you're accusing." He tried smaller, independent lawyers. They listened, nodded sympathetically, and then quoted retainers that were more than he made in 6 months. "We just don't have the resources to go up against a giant like Lone Star," one admitted. "They'll bury us in paperwork." His last hope, Houston's Legal Aid Society, was a scene of quiet desperation. The waiting room was packed with people whose faces held the same weary anxiety as his own. When he finally got to the front, the overworked clerk glanced at his file and shook her head before he'd even finished his sentence. "Foreclosure defense? We're at capacity. Our wait list is over a year long." The system wasn't just failing him. It was a fortress, and every door was barred. The bank knew this. They counted on it. And just to make sure he understood the rules of the game, they began to tighten the screws. A few days after his visit with Fletcher, he tried to buy groceries. His debit card was declined. He checked his banking app. His account, the one with his last freelance payment, was frozen. A stark, red banner flashed across the screen. "Account under review for suspicious activity." The next morning, the final blow. He woke to the sound of his neighbor shouting his name. He ran outside to see his Ford F-150, the one thing his father had left him, being hoisted onto the back of a tow truck. It was gone in less than a minute. They weren't just taking his house. They were systematically dismantling his life, piece by piece, trying to leave him so broken and powerless that surrender would be his only option. The bank's retaliation was swift and brutal, but the ultimate violation, the act that transformed Marcus's grief and frustration into an unquenchable fire, came a week before the notice said it would. He returned from a fruitless job interview to find a moving truck parked in front of his mother's house. 2 men, their faces impassive and bored, were carrying his mother's favorite armchair, the one with the faded floral pattern, where she used to sit and read for hours down the porch steps. A burly sheriff's deputy stood by the curb, arms crossed, his mirrored sunglasses making him look like an unfeeling insect. "What the hell is going on?" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking as he sprinted across the lawn. "The notice said I had until next week." The deputy barely glanced at him, instead pulling a fresh document from his clipboard. "Bank filed for an expedited eviction. Judge signed off on it this morning. The property no longer belongs to you, son. You need to stay off of it." It was a blur of methodical cruelty. He stood on the sidewalk, numb and powerless, as they stripped his home of its soul. Each item they carried out was a memory being desecrated. The worn wooden dining table, site of 1,000 family meals. The box of photo albums, his entire childhood cataloged within. His mother's nursing degree, ripped from the wall and tossed into a box with kitchen utensils. They didn't pack, they purged. A lamp shattered on the curb. A box of his mother's treasured porcelain figurines was dropped, the sound of it breaking drowned out by the rumble of the truck's engine. The deepest cut came from across the street. One of his neighbors, a man he'd known his whole life, stood on his own perfectly manicured lawn, arms crossed, and chuckled. "Should have known better," the man muttered to his wife, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Can't keep a place like this if you can't pay for it." The casual cruelty, the smug satisfaction in his misfortune, was a venom that seeped into Marcus's bones. They didn't just see a man losing his home. They saw a stereotype being confirmed. That night, homeless, heartbroken, and utterly alone, Marcus sat in the 24-hour glow of a Shipley's Do Nuts, a cold coffee his only companion. He could surrender. He could take what little he had left, find a cheap apartment and try to forget. The world was telling him, screaming at him, that this was the only sane option. But as he stared at his reflection in the dark window, he didn't see a victim. He saw his mother's son. He saw the fire in her eyes when she stood up to a doctor who was mistreating a patient. He heard her voice in his head. "You don't let bullies win, Mijo. Not ever." The grief and despair in his heart began to cool, hardening into something else. Cold, hard resolve. If the system was a fortress, he would find a crack. If the law was a weapon they were using against him, he would learn to wield it himself. His new home became the University of Houston's law library. He wasn't a student, but he looked the part, finding a quiet corral in the back and claiming it as his own. The days blurred into a montage of tireless effort. He spent every waking hour surrounded by towering shelves of books that smelled of dust and knowledge. He learned about promissory notes, deed of trust statutes, and the labyrinthine rules of the Uniform Commercial Code. He was fueled by vending machine coffee and a pure, simmering rage. He cross-referenced cases from across the country, his yellow legal pads filling with frantic, desperate scribbles. He read about families in California, in Florida, in New York, all crushed by the same predatory tactics. He wasn't alone. His fight was their fight. One evening, as he was packing up, a custodian, an older black woman named Mrs. Evelyn Mae Johnson, stopped by his corral. She'd seen him there day after day, his face growing more haggard, the pile of books growing taller. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, baby," she said, her voice warm and kind. Marcus managed a tired smile. "Feels like it, ma'am. I'm fighting the bank for my mom's house." She nodded slowly, a deep, knowing wisdom in her eyes. "My daddy used to say," she began, leaning on her broom, "when they build the game and write all the rules to make you lose, you got two choices. You can refuse to play, and they take everything. Or you can learn the rules so well you know the game better than they do. You find the one rule they forgot about, the one they thought was too small to matter. That's where you beat them." Her words hit him like a lightning bolt. It wasn't about finding a loophole. It was about mastering their own system. He wasn't just looking for a mistake anymore. He was looking for the weapon they had inadvertently left behind. That night, he stayed later than ever. The library was empty, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights above. And then, at 3:17 a.m., buried deep in a dense, jargon-filled statute on property transfers, he found it. A single, beautiful line of text. All mortgage assignments must be accompanied by a valid, physical endorsement from the assignor to the assignee.
À signature.
A simple, physical signature from the previous lender was required to make the transfer of the loan to Lone Star Heritage Bank legally valid. His heart hammered against his ribs. He pulled up the bank's foreclosure filings on the library computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He scrolled through the digital copies of the transfer documents. The assignment from the previous lender, a company that had gone bankrupt, to Lone Star Heritage Bank was a clean digital file. There was no signature.
No endorsement.
Legally, they had no right to foreclose. They didn't actually own the debt. They were a phantom creditor, a ghost in the machine who had stolen his house with nothing but digital smoke and mirrors. It was a technicality, a piece of bureaucratic minutiae they assumed no one would ever be desperate enough or crazy enough to look for. But for Marcus Thorne, it wasn't a technicality. It was the key. It was the sword. And he was finally ready to go to war. The discovery of the missing endorsement was like a shot of pure adrenaline. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a flicker of something other than despair. Hope. It was a dangerous, fragile thing, but it was real. Armed with this new knowledge, he filed his first motion with the court, a motion to compel discovery, demanding that Lone Star Heritage Bank produce the original, physically endorsed promissory note. He did it himself using a template he found online and hand-delivered it to the courthouse, a small act of defiance that felt monumental. The bank's response was not what he expected. They didn't produce the note. Instead, they tried to bury him. Their legal team, led by the formidable Caleb Vance, filed a motion to dismiss, calling his claim frivolous and a desperate delaying tactic. But Marcus was ready. He countered with his own motion, citing the exact statute he'd found in the law library. He was learning their language, playing their game. It was during this initial skirmish that his first true ally appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. He was at a small coffee shop near the courthouse, reviewing his filings, when a woman approached his table. She was in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that held a familiar weariness. "You're Marcus Thorne, right?" she asked quietly. "The one fighting Lone Star on the missing endorsement?" Marcus was instantly wary. "Who's asking?" "My name is Sophia Rossi," she said, pulling out a chair. "I used to be a paralegal in their foreclosure department. I quit 3 months ago. I couldn't stomach it anymore." She pushed a thick manila folder across the table. "I thought these might help." Marcus hesitated, then opened the folder. His breath caught in his throat. Inside were copies of internal emails, memos, and training documents. It was the bank's playbook, laid bare. He saw email chains discussing how to fast-track foreclosures in specific zip codes that corresponded to Houston's predominantly black and Hispanic neighborhoods. He saw a memo from Ron Fletcher to the legal department that was so blatant it made him sick. It read, High-risk asset liquidation. To minimize litigation exposure, we must prioritize processing for these properties. The strategy is to expedite evictions before formal legal challenges can be properly filed and mounted. Velocity is our shield. High-risk assets, Marcus muttered, the corporate jargon tasting like ash in his mouth. That's what they call our homes. It's their code for people they think won't or can't fight back, Sophia said, her voice laced with a bitter anger. They target the elderly, the recently widowed, people who don't speak English well. They assume no one has the money or the knowledge to challenge them. They count on the system to protect them. "Please," she said, her eyes pleading, "use this. Prove them wrong." This folder was more than a smoking gun. It was an arsenal, but wielding it came at a terrible price. The bank, feeling the ground shift beneath its feet, retaliated with a savagery that was stunning in its efficiency. They weren't just fighting a legal case anymore. They were trying to scorch the earth around Marcus so that nothing, and no one, could survive. 2 days after Marcus submitted Sophia's documents as evidence in a new filing, Sophia called him, her voice trembling with panic. "They fired me," she choked out. "They said I violated company policy by accessing confidential documents. They know, Marcus. They know I talked to you. And they froze my bank account. My mortgage payment is due next week. I don't know what I'm going to do." The guilt hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. His fight was now destroying the lives of those who tried to help him. And the bank's cruelty didn't stop there. The next day, Izzy called him from work, hysterical. "2 men were here, Marcus," she whispered, hiding in a supply closet. "They didn't say who they were, but they looked like, I don't know, investigators. They talked to my boss. They asked him if he was aware I was associated with someone involved in fraudulent legal activities. My boss told me if I bring any more heat to the office, he'll have to let me go."
Marcus, I'm scared.
This is going too far. He could hear the raw terror in her voice. They were isolating him, turning his support system against him, making him toxic to everyone he cared about. That evening, as he sat alone in his cramped, stuffy motel room, the one he was paying for day by day with what little cash he had left, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He let it ring twice, then answered, his stomach twisting into a knot. The voice on the other end was smooth, polished, and oozing a chilling, reptilian charm. "Mr. Thorne, this is Caleb Vance." Marcus said nothing. "I have to admit, you're more tenacious than we anticipated." Vance continued, a hint of amusement in his tone. "You've made quite a mess. So, I'm calling to offer you an opportunity. A final opportunity to walk away from this with a little dignity and a little cash." "I'm not interested," Marcus said flatly. "Oh, I think you should be," Vance purred. "We are prepared to offer you a settlement. $25,000. A modest sum, I know, but enough for a deposit on a new apartment, a used car. You can put all this unpleasantness behind you. Start fresh. All you have to do is sign a simple non-disclosure agreement and drop all your claims. $25,000 to erase the memory of his mother, to legitimize their theft, to silence him forever. Go to hell, Marcus said. The silken tone in Vance's voice vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated ice. I tried to be reasonable. You need to understand something, Mr. Thorne. This isn't a courtroom drama on television. We are a multi-billion-dollar institution. You are nothing. If you refuse this offer, we will not just defeat you in court. We will bury you. We will use every resource at our disposal to countersue you for defamation, for frivolous litigation. We will tie you up in procedural motions for years, until you are not just broke, but so deep in debt you'll never crawl out. We will destroy your reputation and ensure you never work in this city again. We will make your life a living hell until you are a broken, forgotten man, begging for a deal you can no longer have. Is that what you want? This is your last chance. Walk away, while you still can. The line went dead. Marcus stood in the middle of the room, the phone still pressed to his ear, his hand shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. They were a dragon, and he was a man with a wooden sword. And they were about to unleash their fire. And hey, when you subscribe, go on and ring that little bell too. That way, you'll be the first one called to supper when we put out a new video. You won't want to miss it. The weight of Caleb Vance's threat pressed down on Marcus, a physical force that made it hard to breathe. They were coming for him, for everyone he loved. His evidence, as powerful as it was, still had a weakness. The emails and memos were damning, but the bank could claim they were the work of a few rogue employees. The missing endorsement was a technicality they could try to explain away as a clerical error. He needed something more. He needed an eyewitness to the foundational crime, the forged signature. He needed the notary. His search for Brenda Jackson began with a deep dive into the state's online notary database. He found her name, her commission number, and a last known address in a small, dusty town about an hour's drive east of Houston. It was a long shot. People move, change jobs, but it was the only shot he had. The next morning, using the last of his cash for gas in a car borrowed from a sympathetic friend, he drove out into the flat, sprawling Texas landscape. He found the address, a small, neat house with a chain-link fence and a faded "Beware of Dog" sign. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. After a long moment, the door cracked open. A black woman in her 50s, her face etched with the lines of chronic stress, peered out. "Brenda Jackson?" Marcus asked, holding up a copy of the notarized document so she could see it through the crack. Her eyes flicked down to the paper, and all the color drained from her face. It was a look of pure, primal fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she muttered, her hand moving to close the door. "I can't help you." "Please," Marcus said, his voice urgent, stopping the door with his hand. "My name is Marcus Thorne. That's my mother's house. They stole it from my family using this piece of paper. They're doing this to other people, other families. I just need you to tell me the truth." She hesitated, her eyes darting nervously up and down the quiet street. He saw the conflict raging within her, the fear of the powerful institution, and the guilt of her own complicity. Finally, with a deep, shuddering sigh, she unlatched the chain and let him in. The house was quiet, the air thick with the smell of old coffee and anxiety. She didn't offer him a seat. She stood in the middle of her small living room, wringing her hands. "I didn't see her sign it," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a hushed, shameful rush. "A man from the bank, a courier, he brought me a whole stack of papers one afternoon. He was charming. He said the clients were elderly or sick and couldn't come in. He said it was just a formality to help them out. I was busy. I trusted him. I just stamped them. I stamped the whole stack without looking closely. I didn't know, I swear to God. I didn't know what it was for until you showed up at my door." Tears began to well in her eyes. "Do you have any idea what they'll do to me if I talk? I'll lose my notary commission. I'll lose my job. This house, I could lose everything. Marcus felt a pang of sympathy, but it was overshadowed by the urgency of his own fight. Do you realize what they'll keep doing if you don't talk? He countered gently. They used you. They used your stamp to commit a felony, to steal a family's legacy. They are counting on your silence. Please, Mrs. Jackson, we have to fight back. He saw the fear in her eyes warring with her conscience. After a long, agonizing silence, she wiped her eyes and gave a slow, resolute nod. Okay, she whispered. I'll testify. I'll write an affidavit. I'll do it. With Brenda's sworn statement in hand, Marcus felt a surge of power. This was it, the irrefutable proof of fraud. But the bank's intelligence network was faster and more insidious than he could have imagined. They must have known he'd found her. That night, as he walked the few blocks from the bus stop to his motel, 2 HPD patrol cars screeched to a halt on either side of him, their lights flashing, cutting through the darkness. Before he could even process what was happening, 2 officers were out of their cars, hands on their holstered weapons. Marcus Thorne? One of them asked, his voice cold and authoritative. Yes, Marcus replied, his mind racing. You're under arrest. We have a report of you trespassing at a private residence earlier today. Trespassing? Where? He asked, bewildered. The officer smirked, a cruel, satisfied little twist of his lips. Your old house. Neighbor called it in. Said you were snooping around, harassing them. It was a lie. A blatant, transparent lie. He hadn't been within 5 miles of that house all day. That's not true. I wasn't there. Tell it to the judge, the other officer muttered, grabbing Marcus's arm and twisting it behind his back. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his wrists. They shoved him into the back of the patrol car without another word. He spent the night in the Harris County holding cell. It was his lowest point. The stench of sweat, urine, and industrial disinfectant burned his nose. The concrete bench was freezing. He sat there, under the relentless glare of a single fluorescent bulb, feeling utterly defeated. They hadn't just taken his home and his money. They had taken his freedom. They had successfully branded him a criminal. They were trying to break him, to crush his spirit so completely that he would be too terrified to ever stand up again. As the long, dark hours ticked by, a cold, hard despair began to settle in his soul. For the first time, he thought maybe they've already won. They released him just before dawn, without charging him. The arrest was never about a conviction. It was a message. It was psychological warfare. Marcus stumbled out of the jail into the cool, humid Houston morning, feeling hollowed out, humiliated, and more alone than ever. But as the first rays of sun cut through the city smog, something inside him shifted. The despair from the long night in the cell didn't break him, tempered him. It burned away the last of his fear, leaving only a core of pure, unyielding steel. They had thrown their worst at him. He was still standing. His final hearing was scheduled for the following week. It was the bank's motion to dismiss his entire case as frivolous. If they won, it was all over. The days leading up to it were a blur of frenetic activity. News of his arrest, intended to discredit him, had backfired. It caught the attention of the Texas Justice Initiative, a small but fierce nonprofit that specialized in fighting systemic corruption. A young, brilliant pro bono lawyer named David Chun was assigned to his case. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't alone anymore. David helped him organize his mountain of evidence into a coherent, devastating narrative. They prepped Brenda Jackson for her testimony. They subpoenaed the bank's internal servers to authenticate the emails Sophia had provided. They were ready. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was a different world. It was packed. The back rows were lined with reporters from the Houston Chronicle and local news stations, alerted by David's organization. Community activists and members of his mother's church filled the pews, a silent wall of support behind him. He even saw Sophia Rossi slip into a seat in the back, giving him a small, encouraging nod. At the plaintiff's table, Caleb Vance's usual smugness was gone, replaced by a cold, tight-lipped fury. Ron Fletcher sat behind him, his face pale and drawn. Judge Alastair Cromwell entered, his irritation at the media presence palpable. He banged his gavel, the sound sharp and impatient. "This court is now in session to hear the plaintiff's motion to dismiss," he announced. "Mr. Vance, you may begin." Vance stood, his voice smooth but lacking its usual charm. He painted Marcus as a disgruntled, delusional man, unable to accept his financial reality. He dismissed the evidence as a collection of misunderstandings and clerical errors. It was a polished, professional performance, but it felt hollow. Then it was their turn. David Chin stood, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, the plaintiff would have you believe this is a simple case of a few minor mistakes. We are here today to prove it is a calculated pattern of systemic, malicious fraud." The defense calls Brenda Jackson to the stand. Brenda walked to the stand, her hands trembling but her voice steady. Guided by David's gentle questioning, she told the court everything. She recounted how she was pressured by a bank representative to notarize a stack of documents without witnessing a single signature. "So you are stating, under oath, that you never saw Maria Thorne sign this second mortgage agreement?" David asked, his voice resonating through the silent room. "That is correct," Brenda said firmly. "I never saw her. I never met her. I was misled, and I violated my oath." Vance shot to his feet. "Objection. This is irrelevant. The bank was unaware of any notarial issues." "Overruled," Cromwell snapped, his eyes narrowing. He was being forced to play by the rules in front of the cameras. Next, David presented the emails from Sophia's folder, displaying them on the large screen for the entire court to see. Fletcher's memo about high-risk asset liquidation and expediting evictions loomed over the room. "Does this sound like a clerical error, Your Honor?" David asked. "Or does it sound like a corporate strategy?" The gallery murmured. Reporters furiously typed on their laptops. Vance's face was a mask of stone. "And finally, Your Honor," David said, moving in for the kill. "The foundational document itself, the transfer record assigning the mortgage to Lone Star Heritage Bank. As the court can see, the legally required endorsement from the previous lender is absent. This means the plaintiff never had legal standing to foreclose in the first place. The entire proceeding was illegitimate from the very beginning." The courtroom was dead silent. All eyes were on Judge Cromwell. He was trapped. The evidence was a mountain. The media was watching. He looked from the documents to the pale faces of Vance and Fletcher. He looked at Marcus, standing tall at the defendant's table. And in that moment, Marcus knew he had one more card to play. He leaned over and whispered to David. David nodded. "Your Honor, before you rule, the defense has one final piece of evidence to present. We have video." A jolt went through the plaintiff's table. Caleb Vance whipped his head around to stare at Fletcher, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury. The courtroom screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy from a security camera in a bank conference room. The timestamp was from 3 months ago. Ron Fletcher's voice, amplified by the court speakers, filled the room with a chilling clarity. "If we delay processing just enough," Fletcher was saying to a group of executives, "by the time they get around to realizing the signatures don't match, it won't matter. The court will almost always side with the lender in these cases. We just have to keep pushing. Velocity is our shield." It was a confession, an admission of intent, of strategy, of pure, unadulterated fraud. The gallery erupted. Judge Cromwell slammed his gavel, his face a thunderous mask of fury and, for the first time, resignation. He looked at Marcus, and the mockery was gone, replaced by a grudging, stunned respect. "This court," he declared, his voice sharp and final, "finds sufficient and overwhelming evidence of malicious foreclosure fraud. The plaintiff's motion to dismiss is denied. The foreclosure of Mr. Thorne's home is hereby nullified." He wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court orders an immediate, independent investigation into the foreclosure practices of Lone Star Heritage Bank. And I am referring this case and Mr. Vance to the State Bar for review of ethical violations. Court is adjourned. The final, heavy slam of the gavel echoed like a gunshot, signaling the end of the war. Marcus Thorne had won. The courtroom exploded into a flurry of motion and sound. But for Marcus, it all seemed to happen in slow motion, the noise fading into a distant, victorious roar. The weight of the last 6 months, a physical burden that had stooped his shoulders and shadowed his eyes, began to lift. He felt light. He felt free. He had done it. Nia, her face streaked with tears of relief, rushed to him, throwing her arms around him in a fierce, trembling hug. David Chun clapped him on the back, a wide, triumphant grin splitting his usually serious face. "You didn't just win your case, Marcus," David said, his voice filled with awe. "You blew the whole corrupt system wide open." The consequences for Lone Star Heritage Bank were swift and catastrophic. The video of Ron Fletcher's confession went viral overnight. It was the lead story on every local news channel and was quickly picked up by national outlets. State and federal investigators, armed with search warrants, descended upon the bank's regional headquarters, seizing hard drives and entire file cabinets of documents. The phrase "velocity is our shield" became a meme, a damning shorthand for corporate greed. Ron Fletcher was fired and faced potential criminal charges. Caleb Vance was suspended indefinitely by the state bar, his glittering career in ruins. And Judge Alastair Cromwell, facing intense scrutiny for his initially dismissive handling of the case and newly exposed financial ties to the bank, announced an early retirement. The house of cards had collapsed. A week later, a team of lawyers from a high-powered crisis management firm representing the bank requested a meeting. They didn't want to fight anymore. They wanted to stop the bleeding. They slid a settlement offer across the table to Marcus and David. It was an astronomical number, a figure with 7 digits. Enough money for Marcus to buy any house he wanted, to never have to worry about finances again. It came with only one condition: a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. He had to drop all his civil claims and agree to never speak publicly about the case again. It was a golden gag, a fortune in exchange for his silence. Marcus looked at the number on the paper. He thought about the sleepless nights, the humiliation of the arrest, the fear in Izzy's voice. He thought about the peace of mind this money could buy. Then he thought about Sophia Rossi, who was still struggling to find work. He thought about Brenda Jackson, whose reputation was still under a cloud. He thought about the other families in the high-risk assets memo, the ones who didn't have a smoking gun video, the ones who had already lost everything. He pushed the folder back across the table. "Tell them I'm not for sale," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Let the investigation continue. Let everyone know what they did." David Chin simply smiled. He had known what the answer would be. The true victory came not in a courtroom or a law office, but on a quiet Tuesday evening a month later. Marcus was back in his mother's house. It was still mostly empty, but it was his. He was on the porch, painting the railing, when a car he didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. A woman got out, holding the hand of her teenage son. She approached him hesitantly. "Are you Marcus Thorne?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," he said, putting down his paintbrush. I wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "My sister, she was about to lose her house. Same bank, same kind of forged documents. We didn't know what to do. But because of your case, because of the investigation, a legal aid group took her case. The bank dropped the foreclosure yesterday. You saved my sister's home." She squeezed her son's hand. "You showed us that it's possible to fight back." Marcus looked at the woman and her son, at the hope shining in their eyes. He looked at his own hands, splattered with fresh white paint. He looked at the house, his mother's legacy, standing strong and secure behind him. The fight had taken almost everything from him, but it had given him something he never knew he was looking for: a purpose. The battle wasn't over. The system would regroup. New schemes would be invented. But now people were watching. People were questioning. And all across the city, in neighborhoods just like his, people were fighting back. Marcus Thorne, once dismissed as an entertaining distraction, was now leading the charge. Because he had learned the system's most important secret: true power doesn't belong to those with the most money or the fanciest titles. It belongs to those who, when pushed to the brink, refuse to break. And he was just getting started. Marcus Thorne's story is a raw, unflinching lesson in modern power. It's not just about a bank being crooked. It's about understanding that the system they built is designed to make you feel small, isolated, and ignorant. They count on you not reading the fine print. They bet on you being too intimidated by the legal jargon, too scared of the men in expensive suits, to ever fight back. The ultimate takeaway isn't just about resilience. It's about the transformative power of knowledge. The most potent weapon you can wield against a corrupt system is its own rulebook. Marcus won not by shouting louder, but by learning their game so intimately that he could turn their own complexity, their own bureaucracy, into a weapon against them. He proved that justice isn't something that's given to you. In a world full of Goliaths, you have to build your own slingshot, and knowledge is the stone that brings them down. Marcus was faced with an impossible choice. Take a life-changing, 7-figure settlement and be silenced forever, or refuse the money to continue the fight for countless others, risking further retaliation and personal hardship. What would you have done in his shoes? Would you secure your own future, or would you sacrifice it for the greater good? There's no easy answer. Let us know your honest thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation matters. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more stories of courage and justice.